The schedule keeps getting better and better, but you know what? So does Auburn. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Auburn Tigers, and this is something we need to get to now just about every week because they're playing that well. The games are that good, and they've got the next one, and it could be a stellar matchup in the swamp against the Florida Gators. We got Joe Hunk on the line from the Fallout 740 in Montgomery, Alabama. Joe, how you doing today?
I am doing awesome. This is actually the first time in this season that I'm excited for an Auburn football game and kind of excited for Auburn side of this. Like I was excited for Auburn, Oregon because it was the first game of the season. But now that we've seen Auburn play, I'm like, I'm kind of excited to watch some Auburn football right now. So it's a little bit fun. This football season's getting better.
You know, Joe, Mississippi State was one of those games where I heard a number of people say, hey, they're getting 10 points, grab it. Man, Mississippi State's going to go in and surprise them. I did hear a lot of people say, you know, Mississippi State's really not that good, whatever. Auburn's going to blow them away. So I was kind of split on the fence myself about that one. I was surprised with the level of dominance. Mississippi State, we'll see how good they are. They have yet to notch a good win, but what they typically are, a pretty good football team. You know, fringe top 25, 8-win team. Beat the Auburn Tigers last year. You know, this was a scary kind of matchup as an under-the-radar kind of game, and boy, they came out and took care of business in a hurry.
Yeah, and that's the bad thing. I mean, basically, Auburn just kicked them in the junk in the first 3 minutes, and from there, Mississippi State they couldn't recover. And what was weird about it is just how quickly Auburn scored on the very first drive, and then you had the fumbles and the punt or the kickoff fumble and everything else, and Auburn just scoring really quickly. And by the end of that first quarter or so, it's 21-0. And the problem with it was for Mississippi State is they needed to have a good quarterback play. The problem is they had an injured quarterback start off with Tommy Stevens. He doesn't look good. They then make the swap, and you're going back and forth in quarterbacks. And at the same time, while you're doing this, Auburn scoring on their first 5 drives, and you're down like 35-3, and you're going, okay, well, what do we do now? Because we can't come back in this. And so, I mean, just sadly, and it's one of those games that if you take away a couple of minutes, that's a totally different ball game. It may have been for Mississippi State, but those first 5 or 6 minutes, I mean, it really, really hurt them just to start it off, and they couldn't recover.
Yeah, and it was one of those defensive efforts that was so dominant. You know, sometimes you come out of the gate, the offense is scoring, the defense is dominant, you grab a huge lead, and then, you know, you kind of let up, give up some points, which they eventually did. But if you look at that stat sheet, there was hardly any garbage yardage given up because, man, they were determined, focused to close it out strong. 3 yards per carry for Mississippi State. They only completed 13 balls on the night for a team that's behind in throwing the ball. Just not a lot there. Auburn clamped down once again on D.
Well, no, the defense for Auburn is scary. And when you're talking about, this was without Nick Coe. Nick Coe didn't play in this game, and you had Derek Brown start to once again dominate this game. And you're starting to see this Auburn defense really become, it's weird to say scary. And that defensive line is very, very intimidating. And you're now going to start get to a part of this schedule where you kind of have a little bit more, you come out more relaxed on offense, even if you're a fan, knowing that this defensive line, they're going to get after the quarterback and they're going to be able to shut them down and shut them down rather fast. It's really interesting to see because Auburn fans are not used to seeing this in this part of the state. They're used to seeing it up in Tuscaloosa, but they're not used to really seeing a defensive line in a linebacking core be able to shut guys down the way that they have so far in the first few weeks of the season. And so this is kind of a nice surprise going through the fact that Auburn's already played 2 SEC opponents and a non-conference opponent on the road, neutral site, and are still undefeated. It's really kind of weird for them to be in this situation because they haven't been that situation in a while.
They're number 1, Joe, in my top 25. Have been for a few weeks, and I base it totally on resume. I think they're an extremely good team. I don't necessarily think they're the best team in the country. I really don't think they're quite that good. But hey, based on the resume, I think and the dominance of the opponents, again, nobody's really challenged them to the end after obviously the big comeback against Oregon by down by 15. And that's impressive in its own right with a first-time starting quarterback in that type of venue with, that type of national attention, coming out 15 down in the fourth quarter and getting it done. But it's just been impressive. And again, I got him number one based on the resume, but everybody seems to be, at least that I run into, then disparages their opponents after they get done with them and send them to the waste pile, that they're suddenly not good. But they're just keep hammering away. But, man, you could say the same about this Florida team. They just keep getting the job done, keep beating decent teams. It's Miami, Tennessee, Tennessee and Kentucky, not great opponents, but still opponents that had some respect, at least Miami and Kentucky, before Florida ran them down. But they just seem to be doing enough, which time will tell whether that's a concern, a warning flag, boy, it's going to catch up with them, or maybe this team knows how to win.
Well, in Florida does know how to win, and they're doing so in ways that the problem with where Florida's looking at is that they're only going to be judged by one team, and that's going to be Georgia, and that's going to be coming up around Halloween, and that's how you're going to judge if Florida is a good football team or not. They played a Miami team, which honestly is not a bad football team. And kind of their situation similarly mirrors what Auburn's going through, because you can say, oh, well, they've beaten the teams that are in front of them. They've beaten SEC opponents, but they're not the good SEC opponents. Well, wait a second. We thought Texas A&M was going to be better this year, and Kellen Mond hasn't progressed. So now Auburn going in and dominating Texas A&M, that was cool and all, but it's not as sexy as we thought it was going to be at the beginning of the season. Well, what about Oregon? Well, they're a Pac-12 team. They haven't lost since. Like, it's that kind of stuff that you're going to find a reason for it. But the way that Auburn fans and the Auburn team know that they're good is because now Alabama and Alabama fans are starting to talk about Auburn and trash talk Auburn, which normally doesn't happen until you get to Iron Bowl week. Now it's one of those, wait a second. Matter of fact, before we even started talking, I got a text message from an Alabama fan, and his words to me were, okay, Auburn has my attention. I'm awake now. And that's what you're starting to see with the progression of it. And it does go back to things that in the beginning of the year that you and I've talked about with Gus Malzahn. There's no Auburn fan right now, as much as you want to bash Gus Malzahn, there's no Auburn fan that can do that, because he's calling plays that are different than whatever he's called in the past. He's becoming almost charismatic, and you're starting to see that confidence, which Auburn fans have not seen the entire time he's been at Auburn. And at the same time, he's doing the one thing that people have bashed him for since he's been here as an offensive coordinator as well as a head coach, and that is developing a quarterback. If you go and you look at Bo Nix in that first game, that very first game against Oregon, and watch him in the progression to last week's game against Mississippi State, you can see the progression. And that is something that we've really never been able to see with a young quarterback underneath Gus Malzahn. And that is where this is so impressive, because 2 and 3 weeks ago, Bo Nix is not hitting Anthony Schwartz and Seth Williams in stride. On Saturday, it was art. It was absolutely gorgeous to watch Bo Nix drop back and throw a deep pass to those guys. The one he threw to Anthony Schwartz on the left side of the field as Anthony took like 6 steps and stepped out of bounds right before the goal line. Perfect pass. Beautiful pass. That's that chemistry that they're just now starting to build. And honestly, I think that's part of the reason why the Auburn fan base is getting as excited as they are about the team right now.
Joe Hunk from 740 The Fallout in Montgomery, Alabama. Joe, I love the way you just framed it, because this is the way I think about it, is that we know that the head coach is the CEO. He sets the tone, the vibe, the environment. He sets the culture. He is unlike almost anybody in sports, aside from his counterpart, the college basketball coach, in regards to just being a father figure, just everything at a place like Auburn, one of the top 10 or 15 programs in the country. So Gus Malzahn has been on the hot seat. He's been criticized. He's been ridiculed. He's not been able to do, based on his own decision, the thing that he loves to do and has gotten him this job, and that's call plays. And now he's just in such a comfort zone, doing what he loves to do, enjoys calling plays, having his hands right on the offense, play to play to play. Then he exudes that confidence, and it has trickled down to the team. And you can just see it. This is an extremely confident team, confident quarterback. He gets better by the week. He delivered last week big chunk plays. And obviously Seth Williams, a guy that was a beneficiary of that. And it just, again, yeah, it just seems to be on a roll and fitting just rather well.
Well, it's very surprising because when you're an Auburn fan and you've went through the times that you have, watch this football game, and you're now starting to see even some of the diehard fans that were wanting to bash something can't find anything. Like it's that surprising. He's not making Anders Carlton, kick from 60 yards out now. Like all these things that he's done in the past isn't happening. He is growing as a head coach. He is growing as a play caller. He is grown as a person in a press conference that is not the most boring man in the room anymore. He's totally different. We saw it at SEC Media Days, and I think at the time we were going, okay, is why is he like this? What is the reason behind this? And it really is just this, you guys don't believe in me. That's fine. Screw you. I'm going to show you exactly what's going on. And the team has kind of taken that mentality of, all right, let's just go out there and just have fun doing this. And that's what you're starting to see. And the fact that you can start using the word swagger with Auburn, with Malzahn, with players like Anthony Schwartz and Seth Williams, and you're starting to see a guy, look, there's one guy that nobody talks about because of all the good wide receivers that Auburn has now, and even Eli Stove, is Sal Cannella. This guy couldn't catch anything last season. Nothing. He was a guy brought in that we thought was just going to be this basic tight end, this H-back type guy, and he was going to be set. He didn't learn the position well, so they moved him out to wide receiver. Last year, he made one catch for a touchdown against Washington, maybe made another one here and there, didn't catch anything. He's on the field now making catches just like everybody else, and he's not as much of a liability anymore. And all of this is taking place, and you still have Boobie Whitlow, that's one of the best running backs in the SEC now, averaging over 100 rushing yards per game, and he doesn't even get talked about as much, and he had a dominant performance against Mississippi State as well. He's starting to show the swagger. So all of the swagger on the offense, and then there's guys like KJ Britt that never get talked about. He's one of the best players in the SEC in sacks, and people don't even realize it because of how many players and personalities are now on this team. It's really fun to watch, and you haven't really seen this in the past few years.
It's Auburn. It's Florida. They're in the Swamp on Saturday afternoon. Should be a fascinating game and huge in the SEC in both divisions. Of course, with the Gators coming in with Kyle Trask at quarterback, a much different player to a certain extent than Felipe Franks, less mobile, maybe a more accurate passer. He's getting the job done at 77% completion percentage. Joe, I would guess that you don't necessarily have concerns on the Auburn side. Just basically everybody plays a C game at some point. And if they do that in the Swamp, even though Florida's not been dynamic or off the charts great, they obviously have NFL players all over the field, and they're at home. There is an indication here for me when Vegas says you're the better team, even by 3 points, when you're on the road at a tough venue, one of the 10 toughest places to play in the nation. I think that speaks volumes for Auburn's talent and how much they've impressed.
Well, it does, and I think that with that, that's why this game becomes exciting. There have been very few Auburn games in the past 2 or 3 years where I've actually sat and started being like, man, I cannot wait till Saturday. But this is one of them, and it's because both teams are coming in and they're playing very well. And I think that with the swap, as bad as it was for Felipe Franks and the injury, this team in Florida actually got better, in my opinion, after the injury, which is really sad to say. But you have a defense that is one of the best defenses in the SEC. You're talking about they lead the team, or they lead the conference in tackles for loss. They lead the conference in sacks. You're talking about all the things that they do well at getting pressure on this from a defensive side, and they're very similar to Auburn. These two teams match up very well. The only problem that Florida has is a guy like Tony, who is their speedster at wide receiver, is going to be out, where Auburn's Anthony Schwartz is now getting healthy and is healthy for this game. That's really the only difference between the two. What's really going to be interesting, is going to be fun for me to watch, is if Florida throws CJ Henderson on Anthony Schwartz, because that's their fast secondary player. And I really want to see now how teams are going to start countering the Anthony Schwartz speed because of what's happened at Texas A&M, because of what has happened against Mississippi State, because basically the moment the guy gets around the edge, you're almost counting it as a touchdown. Some of those things that you're starting to see from Auburn. Now I want to see how teams are going to start countering that. And it may simply be, let's just put our fastest guy on him and just hope that he can tackle him.
So this is what we do each and every day, folks, is we talk college football nonstop. Analysis from myself. I just released a series in which, get this one, Joe. So Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Oklahoma just reached the 900 win club in the last 2 weeks. So I looked at the top 15 winners of all time, looked at how they performed in the last 10 years, which wouldn't surprise you that Tennessee is last among those 15 teams
Shock
in the last 10 years by far. So teams are passing them. Ohio State, Alabama's been the most dominant, 117 wins in the last 10 years. Ohio State's been number 2. Clemson's been number 3. So they're leaping, frogging teams. And then trying to project, okay, what's this board going to look like in 10 years from now? Because, man, Ohio State and Alabama are closing down on Michigan fast for the all-time lead and win. So just to get everybody an idea that doesn't catch me on a regular basis, we talk college football. We're nerds. We talk hardcore college football all the time. We talk with smart people like Joe and entertaining people like Joe. Love to hear him come on here and break down Auburn football. Joe, we appreciate you stopping by, man.
Man, anytime. I love it.